All right, we're going to wrap up this chapter by looking at what are the sort of social costs of monopoly. So this kind of takes us back to what was it? I think either the appendix to chapter 3 or it might have been chapter 4 where we talked about consumer surplus, right? Surplus in general. So that's really what we're going to be talking about here. So let's compare, or rather, let's assume that a monopolist comes in and buys up every single perfect competitor, so effectively taking the market or industry from perfect competition, where there's an efficient outcome, social welfare is maximized, producer and consumer surplus is maximized, to a monopoly. And what we'll see is that the monopolist charges a higher price by restricting quantity, right? So they sell a lower amount than would be the case in perfect competition in order to increase the price and maximize profit. And because of that, consumers will pay a price that exceeds marginal cost of production, and resources are misallocated in such a situation. Okay, so let's see that graphically. All right, so this would be perhaps the perfectly competitive situation. A competitive price equilibrium. And up here in this triangle here would be consumer surplus, down here would be producer surplus. Okay, now let's think about what the monopoly would do with the same demand curve, right? Here's its marginal revenue curve. Let's even assume that it has the same marginal cost, right, as the perfectly competitive case. Well, it's not going to produce here like in a competitive industry, right? It's going to choose to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and then choose its price, which turns out to be higher than the competitive price, okay? And it's also the case that price is greater than marginal cost, which is not the case over here, right? In this case, price is exactly equal to marginal cost. But here, price is greater than marginal cost. And that leads to an inefficiency. It leads to a misallocation of resources. So in this case now, this smaller triangle up here, that is consumer surplus, as opposed to this larger triangle over here. So consumers are worse off, okay? And then in addition to that, this part right here, this rectangle, which would have been consumer surplus over here in a competitive market, is now transferred to the monopoly in the form of profits. And on top of that, we have some deadweight loss, right? We have these units here that are not being produced, and so we have a deadweight loss. We have a loss of efficiency. Okay, so these are graphically, these are the costs of monopoly in terms of social welfare